Good evening. My name is Michael Davis. I'm a Public Information Officer with Great Basin Incident Management Team 1. Welcome to our community update for September 1st. Currently, Camp Creek Fire is at 1,869 acres, 0% containment, and we have 436 people on the incident. We've got a lot of information for you tonight. Our first speaker will be Operations Section Chief Matt Call. Matt will discuss what's going on with the fire and future operations. Next up, we'll have Captain Brad O'Neill of the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office to discuss preparations for evacuations. He'll be followed by Mr. Chuck Redman, who is our incident meteorologist. Following Chuck, we'll have Mr. Steve Zeal, who is our fire behavior analyst. We'll wrap up with comments from our incident commander, Mr. Evans Quo, and then I'll close this out. Thank you for joining us. Here's Mr. Matt Call.
Thanks, Mike. Again, I'm Matt Call. I'm one of the operations chiefs on the Camp Creek fire. It's Friday and it's a little bit more sunny today, so you've probably seen a little bit more smoke today, which in our mind right now isn't necessarily a bad thing, and we'll kind of explain that. It's been pretty wet, which has slowed down some of our production, but it's allowed the fire to really get knocked down. So I'm going to explain kind of what we're doing here and why a little bit more dry weather for a couple days is kind of good for us. So we're on the Mount Hood Forest, and this is the Portland Watershed, and this perimeter here is our fire. And these lines can be a little bit confusing if you haven't seen them before, but this perimeter here is basically what they're counting as that about 1,900 acres. What we're trying to do is keep it in as small as perimeter as possible, but we can't just put control line wherever we want. We have to look for the best opportunity. So where we've done that is on these sides, we've done it against some roads because there's really dense fuel. It takes a lot of time and effort to make those control lines. So we've used on the south side and this north side, we've used the 12 and the 14 roads. What that does, though, is that puts some unburned fuel between the edge of the fire and our control line. So what we have to do is remove some of that fuel next to the road so the fire kind of gets more on the ground, and then what we'll do is introduce fires to a little bit at a time so we're in control of the fire and the fire doesn't get up in the tops of the trees, because if it gets in the tops of the trees, it gets in that moss, the lichen, and it spots, and that causes us more problems. The problem is if it's really rainy and wet, that fire doesn't carry, and we have a lot of little spots, and then we have to go control each one of those, and that takes a lot of effort. So we want fire here, but not outside of it. We're having pretty good luck, except when it gets really wet. So this dry weather is actually pretty good for us for a couple of days. We have a lot of machines, like heavy equipment, all working all through here with some hand crews. They're removing fuels and making this a containment line on this side of the fire, on this this west side. The same thing's going to happen over here on the west side. We're just a couple of days out. One of the things you've probably seen is some heavy equipment sitting off the 26 road. That's kind of our backstop. That's kind of the bench right now. So as we need them, we're putting them to work. So just because they're sitting there doesn't mean we don't need them and we don't want them. We're just trying to stack the deck in our favor. So we're slowly putting those guys to work as we need them. We've had a hard time getting resources, so right now, finally getting what we need, and we're just kind of stacking our pile pretty deep. This communications tower is almost protected as well, and that's a little bit out there. So that's kind of the big overview. What we're going to do is we're going to show you an infrared image and kind of show you where the heat is. Hey, Mike, can I have you hold this mic for me?
Absolutely.
Thanks. So,
stay behind you.
All right, let me grab this iPad. One of the tools that we use, let me get by the mic. One of the tools we use is an infrared. We do infrared flights once a night, and it gives us this image. So I'm zoomed way out. So we can see the Highway 26, we can see the watershed right here, and then this is our fire. The color is depicting of how hot the edge of the fire is. So I'm going to zoom in. This tool allows us to really see where the heat is on the fire. This gives us an idea what the terrain looks like. So you see this edge here is where we introduce fire, and it's pretty easy to see this road here is a good kind of obvious control line, and we've widened that out a little bit, meaning remove some of the fuels. But if we don't remove all of the fuels here, if we don't burn that out, then that fire can get a head of steam and jump this fire line and work its way down to the watershed. So will work fire up along here, and then slowly that fire will creep back into there. One thing of note is just because this is all shown as fire perimeter inside doesn't mean it's like moonscaped. There might be some trees that are torched out. There might be some really blackened areas, but it's not standard placement. A lot of times it's on the ground. It's a kind of a dynamic mosaicked environment. So just to be clear, it's kind of confusing because it all looks like fire. Granted, that's all could be burned in there and is what we call like solid black. Not a high likelihood that it will escape our parameter, but it's not just one big moonscaped kind of landscape. This will give you an idea of what the terrain is that we're looking at. It's kind of hard to see on a flat map, but it is a three-dimensional environment that we're looking at, and so we have, some limitations with the way crews and the equipment can work. You can't always go up and down those slopes really easily and real quickly, so it takes quite a bit of time, especially in the fuels that we have as dense as they are here. And we'll try to throw in some photos for you to kind of see how much fuel is really out there. So as the days go by, we'll keep this updated and try to give you some different perspectives of this. But this is one of the things that we use quite a bit for the folks on the ground to actually have real-time intelligence and allow them to be productive. That's all I've got, Mike.
Thank you.
All right, good evening. My name is Captain Brad O'Neill with the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office. Part of my job is to work with the Clackamas County Emergency Operations Center, which we've been doing since this fire actually started last week. We have been hearing some comments from the public about evacuations, and that's one of my sole purposes is evacuations. Just to be clear, as of right now, there are no evacuations issued for Clackamas County. We have developed a bunch of contingency zones, and we encourage you to go to our Clackamas County Wildfires webpage for the most updated information on those zones and any changes that may come up in regards to any changes with the fire activity. Other things that Clackamas County Emergency Operations Center does is we're in direct contact with the incident management team up here in Sandy. We communicate multiple times a day, sharing information, making sure that we're all on the same page and working collaboratively together as one big team. This is the first time in my history that I've seen a team work so well together. Everything is going very smooth, very good communication, and we are prepared for this event. Other things that we've been doing in Clackamas County is preparing possibility of evacuation sites for both people and livestock. And with that, those are last resort options. So we just encourage you to think about if you have livestock, if you have friends and family that you can reach out to see if there is an option for you to evacuate to in the case that we do need to issue evacuations. But again, I just want to reiterate, your county is working for you. We're working hard. We're going to continue to work hard until this is no longer a threat. And I thank you very much and appreciate your support and feedback.
So hi, Chuck Redmond, National Weather Service in Boise, but on this, for here, I am the incident meteorologist for the fire, the Camp Creek fire. So basically what I'm here for is provide firefighter safety, and I give weather information to the incident management team, and they will fight the fire based on what the weather conditions are what's going on with the weather. So a little interesting little tidbit, Weather Service employees, Weather Bureau employees, as it was in the past, has been coming to fires since 1928. Matter of fact, today is the 95th anniversary of the first incident meteorologist coming to a fire. That was by Leslie Gray, who worked for the Weather Service office or Weather Bureau office in San Francisco back in the 1920s. So what's the weather going to be like the next couple days? We've had a storm system come through the fire area last couple days, bring a little cold front and a lot of precipitation across the fire area. We've seen about an inch and a half total over the last 3 days of precipitation. And now that storm has kind of moved off to the south and then also west. So that's given us more northeast winds across the fire area. So that's why we've smelled the smoke the last 2 days. That northeast wind pushing the smoke down towards Portland, Sandy, Gresham area. That storm is going to be moving off to the east the next couple days. So those winds will shift from a northeast direction to a more westerly direction. So we should see improving conditions in the smoke, by tomorrow afternoon. So what are we looking at the next several days? Quick warming, drying trend through at least the first part of the weekend before we see another storm system bring more precipitation into the area by the end of the weekend in the first part of next week. We are also looking for a threat of some thunderstorms to move into the region Saturday. Maybe a little bit of precipitation, but probably the biggest concern for the fire and fire crews would be the potential for some gusty winds with any thunderstorm potential. Now, I talked about the next cold front coming in Sunday, Monday. Going into next week, we will see a more long-term warming trend, just a few degrees each day, and a slow drying trend through most of next week. So that's what we're looking at for weather now, and that's all I got.
Hi, I'm Steve Zeal. My function with the management team is to serve as a fire behavior analyst. My focus is the fuels or the burnable vegetation out there, the weather, and the topography in the fire area. I use a variety of tools and resources to determine rate of spread or how fast the fire will travel across the landscape, what direction the fire will spread, and the timing of the fire spread. I do that over time based on fuel, weather, topography. My task is to determine the characteristics of the fire, flame lengths, the potential for crown fire involvement, backing rates, if the fire will spot, or how far ahead of the main fire we could have spot fires, and the likelihood of that. As we know, a lightning strike started the fire on August 25th. That's only a week ago now. That occurred during the height of the summer fire season. Previous weather was very hot and dry for a long time. The area had not seen rainfall for a couple months. That produced very dry forest vegetation. For the first several days, the fire exhibited a wide range of characteristics, including rapid rates of spread, long-range spotting, and areas of crown fire involvement. The fire grew for several days while aggressive suppression efforts were being conducted. Share a picture of the area. A lot of the Bull Run watershed is heavily vegetated with fuels of all sizes. It's kind of a rainforest. It looks pleasant, but when dry, it'll carry fire. Moss trees. Here's an area that with the moss and the undergrowth, very conducive to a wide range of fire behavior. Another picture showing the gross accumulation of vegetation that we've been dealing with. So abundant vegetation, current fire size 1,869 acres. Another picture. And then it rained. So the question at hand is, what effect did the rain have, and what kind of fire behavior can we expect in the future? As the incident meteorologist indicated, well over a half to over an inch of rain fell in the area. That stopped the fire spread. And now smoldering fire, creeping fire with limited flames are present. But due to the effects of a full summer of drying and deep vegetative mat, or we call it duff, an abundance of decaying logs, heavy fuel loading. It's still fairly dry. Another picture showing that we're consuming surface, and the next picture, it rained, but did it penetrate? No, I went out there, and the duff, or the vegetative mat of 3 to 6 inches deep, it was dry under the duff, even though it rained so much. So we are going to have some drying. Fire area is going to retain heat in those large dry fuels. We will retain heat probably through into the fall. There's going to be various amounts of heat present along with available fuels. There will be smoke present in varying amounts, and fire activity, which will be wind or weather dependent. So that's kind of a view of where we're at and where we're going. Thank you for your interest.
Okay, good evening, everybody. My name is Evans Cole. I'm the Incident Commander for Great Basin Team 1. So I just want to provide a few thoughts and summarize what we've been talking about, everything from what operations got planned, what the counties and local fire departments have planned, as well as what weather and fire behavior have been talking about. So over the course of the next 5 to 10 days, the way we see things playing out based on everything you just heard is we're probably going to see a continual drying out of the fuels. And as the fuels continue to dry out, we'll probably start to see an increase in fire activity. And we'll probably also see more of a return to more active fire spread. And as those conditions start to occur, I think a lot of the plans that operations is talking about are going to come into bear. So the main thing that we're trying to do is we're going to be implementing a series of indirect as well as direct suppression actions. And as operations may have alluded to, direct attack is when we get right up on the fire's edge. So we are going direct in some of the places, specifically up in the upper headwaters of the South Fork of Cedar Creek, where we are able to get close to the fire. The reason why we're going direct in that particular area is because we've been able to mitigate the snag hazards. So not only are we have dead trees out there, but some of the shallower rooted green trees, they're very prone to falling over when they get fire weakened. That presents a hazard to the firefighters because the tree could look perfectly safe, but because if the root system burns out, then they have a tendency to tip at any moment's notice. So because the ground is a little more gentle in there, we've been able to get in there with the heavier equipment, such as the feller bunchers as well as the saw teams, and cut those snags down to make that particular area safe for firefighters. Other places, and we've been assessing whether or not we can go direct on, like, say, the west side or the southwest side, where it's quite a bit steeper in terrain and more hemlock. The snag potential there cannot be mitigated. So as a result, we're having to back off and use the main roadways or the indirect hand line that we've constructed. As part of the indirect strategy, though, is we have to, if we go indirect and we're using a containment line that's not right up against the fire's edge, we have to either do one of two things. We either do something with the fuels inside that fire line up against the main fire, or we bring the main fire to the control line. We're doing something about the fuels. That's a heavy lift. It requires a lot of effort, a lot of labor. We just don't have the time for. So putting fire on the ground through firing operations, or what some people call backburning, is a lot more faster way to go. And that is what's occurred over on the, I guess that's like the northwest side of the fire, off the 12 road system right above the Watershed. And so that was an effort that operations have been undertaking for a number of days prior to the rains. And they brought the main fire down to that road, and they spent the last few days mopping it up or securing it, extinguishing it, reducing the spotting potential. The rain helped, but that is the area of the fire that this evening we're going to report as contained. And we'll talk a little bit more about containment here in a little bit, but we've been able to contain that. Not only do we stop the forward spread of the fire, but we've also secured it enough to the point where we don't think any residual heat in that area is going to jump our lines. So direct here or indirect here, we plans on continuing to burning out the road. We're going direct here. Over on the southwest side of the fire and the south side of the fire, using the 14 road system, that's going to continue to be an indirect approach, which means we have to wait for the fuels to recover a little bit. But based on the forecast, we're anticipating sometime in the next few days the fuels will dry out enough for us to resume firing operations. So you'll likely to see very similar activity that we did on the northwest side. We're going to repeat that same action on the south side and ultimately bring the main fire to those roads. Once we bring the main fire to the roads, we can secure it, mop it up, and then we'll be able to call those sections contained. So that's what we're anticipating seeing for the next 5 to 10 days. There is a little bit of there's still some concern out there. We have a lot of persistent heat. We're still trying to figure out how to address the east side, whether or not we can go direct or indirect. But as we get more people to take a look at that, we can assess the hazards and look at the best options. We'll be able to report out what our exact plans are on that side. But for the meantime, right now, the whole south flank, we're still looking at taking an indirect approach using the road network. But if we find an opportunity to either shrink the size of the indirect or go direct, we'll let you folks know. Because I imagine your people that live on this side of the fire are probably very interested and concerned about that. We've also got a number of questions that the PIOs handed us, and those mostly came from some of the questions online, so we are reading those, we are paying attention to them. The first question is, why are we not showing any containment despite several days of fire growth? So that's a good question, and let me touch on that for a minute. So just because we stopped the fire, the forward spread of the fire, I mean that's one thing. That's the first step in suppressing the fires. We stop the forward spread, and we either bring it out to a control line or we establish a control line right on the fire's edge like we have on the northeast side. But we have to secure it enough, which means we have to extinguish all the heat from the fire's edge all the way interior far enough in that we're fairly confident that it won't spot. In other words, burn upwards, ignite things like the moss or some branches or leaves that can then ultimately, if the wind picks up, they jump our lines. So that takes a while. And the heavier the fuel loading is out there, which this area is renowned for very heavy fuel loading, it's going to take a while, a matter of days. But I am expecting to see some increase in containment. Exactly how much? It's based on a mathematical equation. So we're estimating that we have about 1 mile of containment already secured, and we're going to calculate how does that 1 mile compare to the rest of the perimeter of the fire. So let's just say, for example, the overall perimeter of the fire, if you measure every nook, every twist and turn, let's just say we have 20 miles of perimeter. 1 mile of containment versus 20 miles of perimeter, that's 5%. But our GIS folks are calculating that right now, and we'll be able to report out that number. So the second question we have is, how concerned should residents in the communities in Sandy or Welch's be? And what would the fire have to do to reach us? Again, and that's another good question, and that's something that we've been assessing the entire time we've been here. The short answer is it's very wind dependent. And so if we have, for example, a wind coming out of the west, then the fire wants to go to the east. That's just the nature of how fire spreads and fire behaves. Terrain alignment also kind of comes into play. And so given that most of your drainages out here run from uphill from the east, downhill towards the west, we have a wind alignment with the westerly wind. It's kind of like a funnel, the way the terrain lays in there. So a westerly wind would push the fire to the east, and that's where we would expect the most amount of growth. Okay, so specifically the question was asked about Sandy, back off to the west, southwest. So we would have to have like a northeast wind, or at least an easterly wind component. And since the drainages line up, the drainages would funnel the wind in that direction, and we could see potentially sustained growth if we were to have a very strong wind event out of the east or northeast, and we were also in red flag conditions, meaning the temperatures are well up there, 90 degrees. The humidities are quite a bit down there, so like less than 30% relative humidity, and the fuels will also have to have a number of days of drying, such as we could potentially experience later on in September. However, given the amount of emphasis and effort and work that we put into the west side of the fire, I would say that risk is going down all the time. And as we achieve more containment, then the amount of heat, the heat source that a easterly wind would rekindle and push and jump our lines, again, that likelihood is going down all the time. For folks in Welch's, which it's probably a little off our map, down off to the southeast of our fire, we would have to have a fairly strong sustained northwest wind. Again, with similar red flag conditions of all the hallmarks of high temperatures, low humidity. A lot of fuel. The fuels would have to recover from the recent rains and be readily able to burn actively. So we would have to have a fairly strong sustained northwest wind. A question we got a few nights ago at one of the public meetings was which direction of the wind is a good wind for us? Well, honestly, the answer to that depends on where do you live. And so I think as you folks are paying attention to our fire, also pay attention to the wind direction. Yes, we do have a forecast for northeast wind right now today, about 15 miles an hour, which when you bring it down to the surface level, given how dense the vegetation is, 15 miles ends up being 5-6 mile an hour winds on the surface, which is not that much. And more so, given that we had today's winds were preceded by 2 or 3 days of wet conditions and the fuels aren't very conducive to burning, again, I would say that threat is low. But however, I would be paying attention in, say, middle of September after we start getting back into a warming, drying trend, and we do have a east wind in the forecast. At that point, definitely I would be concerned, and that's one of the things we're concerned about. So that's why we bring in incident meteorologists like Chuck and Mike to help inform us as far as what we have and what we, several days out, so we can start pre-planning for that. I think if more to the point, so the third question is how close is the fire to our homes and how fast would it have to reach, or how fast could it reach us if it crosses the 14 road? I don't know exactly who asked this question and where their home is, but since they mentioned the 14 road, let's just use, can we scroll up the map up a little bit? Let's just use Marmot Creek Road, Marmot Road for example. So approximately 3 miles as a crow flies, but the thing you have to realize is right now, so the 14 road system is kind of up on a ridge. So the fire would have to cross that road, which right now we have a lot of firefighters out there keeping that from happening. Then it would have to go downhill, and fires don't burn as fast downhill as they do uphill. Cross, I believe it's Arrow Creek, go up another little small ridge, and then down into another unnamed drainages, and then come back up, and then finally cross the one last final little ridge before it comes down into where the private homes are along Marmot Creek Road. So up, down, all that will slow the fire spread down. And then the farther south you get, especially on some of the private land, you start running into more harvest units from, I don't know, anywhere from back in the 90s and maybe even more recent, that all those type of fuel changes will also have an effect of slowing the fire down a little bit. But based on some calculations from our fire behavior, we figure under red flag conditions and a strong sustained wind, we'd probably be looking at about a ballpark about a 1/4 mile per hour. So roughly speaking, if we were 3 miles away, it would take at least 12 hours for the fire to get from point A to point B to make that 3 miles. However, that's assuming we have a sustained, throughout the entire 12-hour period, we have a sustained wind and those hot, dry conditions. As we get into September, as you all know, the days get shorter. And so the likelihood of us having a sustained 12-hour high wind, high red flag condition it goes down. So our best estimate right now, based on the modeling, is it would probably take several burn periods in order for a fire under those extreme conditions to make it that 3 mile distance. That ties in nicely with the plan that Captain O'Neill talked about, is our notification procedures, how much time they need to get the word out and inform the residents that we're going to from a level, from 0 evacuation warnings to a level 1, level 2, level 3. So right now, I mean, I still have concerns, to be honest, but then again, I'm paid to be a pessimist, but I'm feeling a little more optimistic as we move forward. So hopefully that answers all the questions. With that, I'll give it back to Michael.
Thank you, sir. All right, so we've had had a lot of information there for you. Some good news, we're going to have some containment. We've got extra crews coming in. We've stopped the forward progress of the fire at this time. So there's a lot for you to digest there. If you have additional questions and comments, which I'm sure you will, please enter those in the comments, and we will do our best to get back and answer those questions for you. We at Great Basin Team 1 appreciate your need for timely and accurate information. To that end, we've got, as you've seen, a very robust online presence but we understand not everybody gets their information online. So we've got public information officers out in the community every day speaking with residents face to face. We've also got a phone line set up that you can call in anytime from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. So we're going to take every step that we can to get that information out there to you. So any needs you have, any questions you have, please reach out. That's what we're here for. Thank you very much and have a good evening.